Sup, team? Uh, this is the conclusion to the history of the left from Marx to today. Theoretical Perspectives by Darrow Schecter. All right. The first number of the the first number of the journal International Situationniste in June 1958 begins with an anonymous article entitled "The Bitter Victory of Surrealism." Almost 40 years later, in 1996, Gianfranco Morelli wrote an important historical account of the Situationist International entitled "The Bitter Victory of Situationism." There can be little doubt that what is meant in both cases is a negative victory referring to the urgent but to date impossible task of translating the critique of political economy and the critique of daily life from Marx and Rimbaud to Breton and Debord into a coherent political program of the left. The importance of rearticulating this political program may well be obvious to many militants active in contemporary struggles. There is much evidence to suggest that the political forces and powerful interests organized in social democratic parties are in the process of devising different strategies to accommodate the regimes governed in their names to the production and consumption rhythms of globalized neoliberal capitalism. The surrealists and situationists score a brilliant victory by showing that despite a tremendous amount of theoretical and practical endeavor to the contrary, the dialectical basis of the modernist revolution is not really the philosophical dialectic between materialism and idealism, or even the socioeconomic dialectic between the economy and superstructure. Breton and Lefebvre suggest that it is in fact the dialectic between the critique of political economy and the critique of daily life. The relevance of this project assumes renewed importance today when social democracy everywhere seems ready to emulate liberal democracy by capitulating to the needs of capital, and state socialism is probably less attractive than ever for most people. If the critique of political economy without the critique of daily life is likely to culminate in authoritarian state socialism, and state socialist realist art with very little appeal in the 20th century, the critique of daily life without the critique of political economy tends to run into the dead ends of ineffectual aesthetic protest, dandyism, and academic abstraction. Unless one is convinced by Hart and Negri's theory of the imminent revolutionary desire of the multitude, the surrealist situationist victory may seem all the more bitter in light of the manifest absence of a collective subject capable of reconciling the two critiques in theory and practice. But there is also another possible tentative conclusion to the history of the left offered in this book. That is, there may be a way out of the impasse reached when juxtaposing the negative dialectics of some strands of critical theory with postmodernist immanence on the one hand, or indecisive social democratic reformism with, quote, revolutionary and, quote, dogmatism on the other. To name just a couple of the unsatisfactory alternatives suggested by the different crises that have confronted the left since the end of World War II. Given that Lefebvre and Debord are theorists of everyday life working within a broadly Marxist framework, it is imprecise to regard the dialectic of the two critiques as a simple case of thesis and antithesis. But it would also be imprecise to regard it as an issue internal to and resolvable within Marxism, and indeed it was seen in Chapter 2 and at various other points that Marxism experienced a series of crises well before the authoritarian turn of the Russian Revolution. The more pertinent point is that social democracy's unwillingness or incapacity to envisage an economy that is not subordinate to the requirements of international capital does not alter the reality that the needs of capital are not synonymous with the modalities of what Foucault, developing a number of Nietzsche's ideas, designates as biopower. The discussion in Chapter 5 and 6 suggests that Foucault's analysis of biopower can be regarded as the most brilliant and politically promising development in the critique of everyday life and the society of the spectacle. In Chapter 5, it was shown that the critique of everyday life has literary and avant-garde origins in the writings of Rimbaud and the anti-art performances of the Dada movement. It is a critique that took a more recognizably political turn with surrealism and even more so with situationism. In Chapter 6, it was seen that Foucault's wide-ranging contribution begins with the reflections on language, power, and visibility in his Roman Roussel of 1963 and branches out in several directions thereafter. Despite the undeniable theoretical suggestiveness of works such as A Thousand Plateaux, Empire, and others, it is the analysis of biopower begun by Foucault and the related possibility of a qualitative transformation in the daily lives of individuals that must be developed further and rethought. This rethinking must be done in conjunction with a renewed analysis of Marx on the epistemological and juridical implications of the transformation of external nature in the labor process. Gramsci on hegemony, Neumann and Kirchheimer on structural transformations and the conditions of non-populist conceptions of legitimacy, as well as a fresh look at G.D.H. Cole's proposals for a radically different economy beyond the planned market straitjacket. Hence, the conclusion of this book is that if there is a future for left politics in the sense used here, it depends on the ability of its thinkers and activists to rearticulate the relation between the critique of political economy and capital with the critique of daily life and biopower. This requires a non-authoritarian coordination of the transformation of external nature in the labor process with the transformation of internal human nature and artistic creativity. This may sound utopian, but the traditional idea of art as a sphere of creativity reserved for a select few and removed from everyday concerns has been undermined for reasons cited by the surrealists and the situationists. The epistemological and aesthetic implications of the transformation of human nature are poetically celebrated by Rimbaud and Nietzsche, and touched on to some extent in a more systematic fashion by Adorno. This transformation is bound up with the potential for individual self-overcoming, which is taken considerably further by Foucault with methodological innovation and finesse. The project of self-overcoming needs further elaboration in order to evolve towards a coherent critique of daily life, capable of sustaining and completing the critique of political economy begun by Marx. It may seem odd in a book on the left to attach great importance to an instance of originally aesthetic expression and refusal that has obviously avant-garde and arguably elitist connotations. Yet a key aspect of the existing hegemony is the continual intersection and dispersion of the apparently contradictory forces of capitalist exploitation, which tend to stratify and marginalize, and of biopower, which tend to integrate and assimilate. Chapters 3, 5, and 6 indicate that one of the salient features of coerced integration in practice is the technocratic management of revolt, which is consolidated by the prerogative of political parties to channel the articulation of protest into left and right populist discourses and institutions. These discourses and institutions act as channels that in different ways affirm the identity of the people, as class on the left or as nation on the right, as well as the unity of the state as sovereignty and territorial integrity. Within this constellation of forces, the surrealist, situationist, and biopolitical critique of daily life is easily dismissed as either irrelevant or a luxury of the privileged. This dismissal serves only to reinforce the populist distortion of dissent and ignores the point about the passing of the traditional work of art. It is important for the left to resist this tendency and to bear in mind that Hart and Negri and Virno are absolutely correct to stress the general character of intelligence and the social dimension of productive creativity in the contemporary world. The idea of some of the surrealist, situationist, and Foucault continue to be of central importance for the critique of everyday life, but today it also necessarily includes a range of issues taken up by feminism, post-colonialism, and a number of new social movements, as well as some of the ideas defended by ATTAC, ATTAC, and the participants in the world and European social forums. One of the great challenges is to articulate these concerns in conjunction with a thorough critique of capitalism that fully recognizes the long-term futility of liberal democratic, social democratic, and state socialist modes of organizing the labor process. This will take some time and struggle, but it is certainly not impossible. Henri Lefebvre eloquently states the matter thus, quote, We are still learning to think via metaphysical, abstract, alienated forms of thought. The danger of dogmatic, speculative, and abstract attitudes lies ever in wait for us. How long will it take to create a dialectical consciousness? As long as our consciousness still feels it necessary to rise above its own self, in the metaphysical way, in order to think dialectically. It is impossible to fix a date. It may need generations before the dialectic can penetrate life by means of a regenerated culture. And as for love, which for nearly all of us oscillates between coarse biological need and the fine abstractions of passion's rhetoric, what is there to say? End quote. Henri Lefebvre.